Hello again, everybody. Welcome to Post Pro. I'm Kevin Kubota, and this afternoon, we're going to talk about HDR. What is HDR? High Dynamic Range. Now, we all have heard about HDR, and you probably have your favorite software for processing an HDR image. I've got mine. I'm going to share with you. And while most of the software is fairly automatic, sometimes you're going to run into issues that's not easily solved with one piece of software. And actually, Photoshop has a tool that's really awesome. Now, I gotta admit, I don't really dig Photoshop's HDR method. I use something else, but I still need Photoshop on occasion to process my HDR images. So let's get busy with this and see what we can do. On a recent trip to Italy, I was in Sardinia, the island of Sardinia. It's a beautiful place, and on our way to dinner, we stumbled on this great spot for a sunset view, went out there, and oh, it was amazing. I loved the coastline that I saw there. I didn't have a tripod with me because I just didn't even think we'd come across this amazing scene, but I wanted to do some HDR images. Now, if you've done HDR before, you know the best way to shoot it is 5 images, 1 f-stop apart on a tripod so that they align when you blend them together. Now, that's how you get a perfect HDR, but not everything is fair in life, and sometimes you don't have a tripod. So I went out there and I found this beautiful scene here, and I said, I need a tripod, or the next best thing. It was also very windy, so hand holding it, I was going like this. There's no way I could hand hold it. So I did happen to have with me a little Gorilla Pod, so I made a tripod out of driftwood. My shoestring, which I tied together the tops of the driftwood, made a little tripod teepee, and then I put my Gorilla Pod on it, and here you go, makeshift tripod. Pretty proud of myself for that one. That was pretty cool. So anyway, it gave me the stability I needed to get a pretty close register, but with the wind blowing, the camera's still moving, so my images were not perfectly in register, but they were close. So now I can tweak on them in my HDR software. So let's take a look at these in Lightroom. Here are the 5 images. I shot a bunch of images, and what you do again is shoot 5 images is a good way to do it. 1 f-stop apart. 2 that are under by 1 stop and under by 2 stops, and then 2 that are over, 1 plus 1 and 1 plus 2. So you have under 2, under 1, 0, plus 1, plus 2. 5 images. That's generally the best way to get a good dynamic range in your HDR images. So I bring them into Lightroom, and I always put them into a collection that I've specifically named HDR. So all the images that I want to process into HDRs are in this folder. And then I just need to grab the 5 that I want to use from that series and process them. Now, one of my favorite tools for HDR is actually from Nik software. Nik software I've been using for years. They're good friends of ours, and they make a fantastic tool called HDR Pro. Now in HDR Pro, there is a plugin for Lightroom, so you can actually process your HDRs straight from Lightroom. And the cool thing about it, if I right click and go to export with those 5 images selected here, and scroll down until I see the Nik Effects Pro plugin, and open those up into the software. So we have the image opened in Nik's HDR Effects Pro directly from Lightroom. And I have some presets made, but I'm not going to worry about adjusting the image yet. It's not where I want it to look. First thing I want to check is that the images are aligned, because remember, they weren't perfectly in register. And one way to do that is to zoom in on a part of the image here, or use your little histogram or your loop view on the bottom right. So if I look at the top of this mountain peak, if you look at my histogram and my loop here on the bottom right, I see 3 ghosted images. They didn't align properly. Now Nik does a really good job. I've tried this same image in other software, and it couldn't align it even close to what this has done here. But it's not perfect. I can't use it unless they're perfectly in register, and I really don't have any options to adjust these images within this software to get them perfectly aligned so that it looks right. Otherwise, it's just fuzzy. It looks weird. So I can't do it directly from Lightroom with this software, but I can if I use Photoshop first to align the images. So let me show you some shortcuts for that. I'm going to cancel out of this and go back to those images in Lightroom. So here we are back in Lightroom. I'm looking at those 5 images, and what I want to do is actually use Bridge to help me do a couple little shortcuts. So if I right click on one of these images, I'll have an option to show in Finder. And when I go to that image in the Finder, basically that's a shortcut to just select one of those images. I can drag that image onto my icon for Adobe Bridge. That reveals those same images right here in Bridge. So now I have the same images, same series of 5 right here. Okay, I select them in Bridge, and Bridge has a shortcut that puts all these 5 images into one image in Photoshop, each as a separate layer stacked on top of each other. And Lightroom can't do this, only Bridge can. I'll go to Tools, Photoshop, Load Files into Photoshop Layers, right there. Okay, we've got them all loaded into Photoshop, and you can see that Bridge put each one of those separate files on its own layer in one document. And that's kind of key to our trick here, is I want to be able to align them using that cool Photoshop automatic align feature that we used in one of our earlier episodes. Remember that? That's how we're going to get these images aligned so that we can process them into a nice HDR. So if you look at the image here, I'm going to pull a guideline down right to the tip of that mountain from the top and also on the right, so we can now see exactly how far off they are. I use that as my reference point, and I'll zoom in a little bit here. So if I turn off the top layer, you can see how it shifts to the next one below, and that one shifts again, and that one shifts a little more, and that one shifts quite a bit. Okay, so between the 5 layers, each one is shifted quite a bit. I'll select all 5 of those layers, go to Edit, Auto Align Layers, and let the auto option be my choice. Hit OK. Twiddle your thumbs for just a little bit. Watch Photoshop do its thing. It's going to align them based on detail that it finds in the image. And there we go. And now we'll double check again. I'll move those guides exactly to the point of that mountain, to the side of that cliff there, and turn off each layer individually. And now we can see they're all perfectly in register. Cool. Only thing that you're going to get is a little bit of shifting around the edges because each image is scooted one way or the other. So what I typically will do is then crop just a wee little bit off of my image using my selection tool. I select all to select the entire border of the image. Then I'll take the select menu, transform selection, hold down one of the corner handles and my Option or Alt key and pull in just a couple of pixels and hit enter. Now I can see the selection is in just a couple pixels from the edge all the way around, 2 or 3. Depending on how much you had to shift it, you may need to crop a little bit more, and you can tell by looking at your edges where they don't align here. See that there? So I've cleared the edges that don't align with my selection. Then I go to Image, Crop, and that trims off everything outside the selection. Now I've got 5 images, exact same size, perfectly in register, ready to make my HDR. So I'm going to deselect, and now we'll use another little trick. File, Scripts, Export Layers to Files. So now before we brought the files in as a separate layer, now we want to split those layers into separate files using this other script in Photoshop. So I'll select that option. Here in the dialog box it says, where do you want to put them? I will put them in a folder. I'll call it HDR Ready to Go. I don't need to change the name. JPEG is fine. You can use TIFF or whatever format you want. Decide the quality and hit run. Now Photoshop will take each layer, save it as a separate file as a JPEG. Export layers was successful. I like to hear that. Now, one other thing you need to know when you use this little trick to export your layers to files, Photoshop will actually name it using the original file name plus the extension of whatever file format. So you can see here I've got it as a, it was originally an NEF file, but it adds JPEG. So I actually have a double extension on it, which could screw things up when you import these into Nik software. So it gets confused when it sees 2 file formats. So I'm going to take off the NEF part. So So I have a little utility called a Better Finder Rename that I use for this purpose, and it removes pieces of text or adds it. I'll just say perform the rename there. Rename them all. It's done. So now I have just JPEG on the end, and I'm ready to launch my HDR software. So I'll launch Nik HDR Effects Pro. Separately from Photoshop, separately from Lightroom, you can launch it as a standalone program and load that series of images we just created. All right. HDR ready to go, and open them. As you're opening them, Nik might get confused because it doesn't read the metadata from these exported files. So all you need to do is tell it you shot them one stop apart. That's all you have to do, and hit OK. All right, now the image is open in Nik, and when we take a look at the detail area here at the top of the mountain, if I hold my mouse over it, we can see we're much better now. There's just a wee little bit of ghosting, and you know why that's happening? The alignment, because Nik is trying to figure out, the software is trying to figure it out, because it's still trying to align your images that are already aligned. And it doesn't really need to do any alignment, so there's an option at the very top of the window that says alignment and ghost reduction. I'm going to click that and turn off alignment because we already aligned the images. It's better to turn it off when you have them aligned, and click OK. And it's going to just do a quick recalculation here without trying to align the images at all. Then we should have a nice, perfectly registered image. Okay, so now let's take a peek again. If we look at that peak, now we see no ghosting, perfect detail, perfect alignment on the image. Now we're ready to tweak it and make it look beautiful. Now, Nik has some great presets already that you can try, and what I suggest is finding one that's close to the look you want and then modifying a little bit to get the taste, the detail, the information that you want. And that's exactly what I've done. I've taken one of the vibrant details and colors preset and tweaked a little bit to get the look that I want, which is that. Now there's a couple other tools you can use inside the software that really help. Now you can see on the top corners of my image there's a little bit of vignetting, and that's actually very slight vignetting that the process of making the HDR has enhanced. It's made it more obvious than it needs to be. But I can take it back in time because Nik has these cool little things called control points. If you click on that there, control point lets you selectively adjust parts of the image depending on how broad a selection you make or what adjustments you want to do. It's pretty powerful. So I'm going to click right on that top corner where that little faded area is, expand my control point. This top slider here tells you how far that adjustment will reach. And what I want to do is change the structure. The structure is what actually made that vignetting appear, the high level of structure, which is enhancing the edge detail, contrast. And if I click off of the image now, you can see that that hid that little vignetted corner. There's before and after. And there's another one in the other corner, so what I'm going to do is take that same control point, hold down my Option or Alt key on the PC, and drag it over to the other corner and place it there, basically copying that effect there to that corner, dropping the structure down, and now I've eliminated those two dark spots in the corner. Two more things I want to do. I want a little more structure, a little more detail, richness in the water and those rocks, separately from everything else. So I'll add another control point right here in the water, drag the area it's going to affect right about there, and then take the structure slider up. So see how that affects now just the water here in the middle? I'll drag that same structure point, hold the Option key down, drag it onto the rocks, and that adds the extra structure. Oops, I dragged the wrong one. That was saturation, not structure. There we go. Structure to the rocks adds more detail. And same with this one. I think I did the wrong one. More detail to the water. That's looking better. So I can turn them both off here, selective adjustments on and off, so I can see the effect before and after. Now I've got beautiful texture right here, more like a painting texture in the rocks. Everything else is smooth out. I like it the way it is. The color is good. And I have a nice HDR that I just need to save. And I'm done. Yeah, baby. It's good. So, some cool little tricks you can use. Again, Photoshop does have its own HDR processing engine. I'm not a real big fan of it. It's kind of clunky, kind of difficult to use, and you can't get the effects that you really can with some of these other programs. And I've tried several of them, and none of them can really align this particular series of images like I can do using the two methods of Photoshop alignment and then loading them into HDR Pro. So, cool little trick to know. If you've got a great series of images you want to make HDR, but you didn't shoot them on a tripod, that'll do the trick. See you next week on Post Pro. Have a great one.